Okay, here is a not so short video on the history of the USSR, the Soviet Union, or Communist Russia, whatever you want to call it. Now, I know a lot of you guys that are doing junior cycle history are maybe being examined on this, or teachers telling you that you have to prepare this. This is a very detailed account of kind of an overview of the USSR between 1917 and 1945. I'm going to go through it quickly. There's a lot more detail on this map than you need to know. I have students who are studying for a leaving certificate as well, and a number of them have said to me they've watched these videos and asked, could I add some leaving cert videos in as well. So this is what I'm trying to do here, is bridge the gap between the two. Okay, so I'll go through this and I'll talk about what I think you would need to know for junior cycle and wouldn't need to know for junior cycle, so that you can make your decisions yourself. Okay, so let's go. We ready to go to work? Right, let's go to work. So we all know the name Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Okay, and Lenin was the leader of the communists who took power in the October Revolution of 1917. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole story behind Lenin and his life and his background. First of all, I don't believe you're going to be asked to write anything about his life. You just need to know that he was somebody who was committed to a complete change in which Russia was governed. He was influenced by and a follower of the ideas of a fella called Karl Marx and his mate Joseph Engels, who come up with the idea of communism. And communism was the idea that you can fix all the problems in a country by sharing the wealth of that country equally among the people. That the reason that there's so much suffering in the world is because there's an elite of really, really rich people who take all of the wealth for themselves, and that needs to change. So that's essentially what Lenin believed in, and that was why he became a communist, or a Bolshevik. So if you hear the word Bolshevik means, well, it refers to the communists who seized power under Lenin's leadership in the October Revolution of 1917. There's a whole backstory to that. Russia's involvement in World War One, the unpopularity of the Tsar, the military disasters. I'm not getting into that. You don't need to know it, okay? Now, what we do know is that the king of Russia, the title was Tsar, Tsar coming from Caesar, or emperor, the Roman term coming after Julius Caesar, even though he wasn't an emperor. Again, not going down that rabbit hole. So Tsar Nicholas was an absolute monarch. He had all the power in the Soviet Union. He was overthrown as a result of the October Revolution, and then the communists executed him and his family, okay, in Ekaterinburg. They were all killed. Him, his son, his wife, his daughters were all killed. As a result of that, there was a civil war, a brutal, awful, terrible, unimaginably cruel civil war in the Soviet Union, or in Russia, between 1917 and 1921. The Reds, they were the communists. The Whites were this kind of, hodgepodge group of different people, monarchists, Democrats, anti-communists, who were determined that Russia would not remain under the rule of communists, and the Reds won. Again, if you're doing the leaving cert, there's a whole essay to be written on why the Reds won. If you do the junior cycle, you don't need to know that. All you need to know is that there was a revolution in 1917 led by Lenin. They were communists. They took over the Soviet, or Russia, and by 1921, Russia was under complete control of the communists, and it changed its name, or the name of the country was changed to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR, or the Soviet Union. You need to know, I think it's a good idea to know the names of some of the leading Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks, again, the original communists. So Leon Trotsky, he was the guy who was the military commander of the Red Army during the Civil War, and was consequently extremely popular with the party and with the people of Russia who supported the party. Then you have Zinoviev and Kamenev, two of the old school Bolsheviks who become really important in the 1920s because of the alliance they formed with Stalin. And then you have Nikolai Bukharin, who, again, very important Bolshevik leader, very, very popular, and who we're going to learn later on made the mistake of crossing Stalin. Okay? So the Soviet Union was an anti-democratic state. It did not believe in democracy. It believed that democracy played into the hands of the rich and could be manipulated. that the party, the Communist Party, had to take control and rule the state on behalf of the people, and that there would be one leader who would have complete power, and that leader would have complete power of the party, and the party would have complete power in the state. So if in your junior cycle they ask you to explain the term totalitarianism, it's a big word, means something simple. It's the same in Nazi Germany. I did a previous video on the comparisons and the similarities between the Nazi German state and the Soviet state. Totalitarianism means one person or one party have total control of the government of a country. And the Soviet Union was a totalitarian state. All other political parties were banned, and all dissent or all disagreement with the line of the communists was crushed. Now, you're going to learn about this fella called Joseph Dugulashvili. And thank goodness for us, Joseph Dugulashvili adopted a code name when he was on the run in the pre-revolutionary days, and he became known as Stalin. Koba first, actually, Koba, and then he took on the code name Stalin, which stuck. So he's now known to history as Joseph Stalin. Now, he became the general secretary of the Communist Party, which was a very, 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 unattractive position. Most of the communist leadership did not want this position because there was a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy involved. But essentially, from early in the history of the Soviet Union, Stalin became influential because as general secretary, he was the person giving out jobs on a local scale or a local basis to party functionaries or to people involved in the party. And of course, if Stalin's responsible for giving you a job, well, then you owe Stalin a favor. And he became very influential because of the debt that was owed to him by many party members. Trotsky, he was the big superstar of the party, the war hero. He was the guy who, famously, led the Red Army during the Civil War, and was certainly given the credit for leading the Red Army during the Civil War. And if when Lenin was going to, be removed from the leadership or was going to pass away or whatever, it was kind of understood that Trotsky was next in line. Okay? Now, Stalin wanted to be next in line to Lenin, but Lenin didn't want Stalin. So when Lenin was dying in 1924, he knew he was going to die, and he left behind him a last testament, kind of his words for what he wanted to happen in the Soviet Union. And one of the things he said was he didn't want Stalin to be leader. Okay, he said this guy is dangerous, this guy is volatile, he's not to be trusted, we shouldn't have him as leader. But of course, when Stalin got his hands on that last testament, Lenin's last testament, he tried to suppress it, and he tried to twist it to make it look as if that Lenin never wrote it in the first place. Stalin, in fact, organized Lenin's funeral. He made sure that he was there, photographed carrying Lenin's coffin, looking devastated at the death of Lenin. And he made sure that Trotsky wasn't at the funeral by telling Trotsky an inaccurate date for the funeral, making it look like Trotsky had disrespected the great leader. So during the early and mid-1920s, this cult of Lenin grew up. This guy, this hero who had led the revolution, who had saved Russia from inequality from the Tsars, this myth, this propaganda, and Stalin tied himself very closely to that, so that the shine or the glamour of Lenin's character would be reflected on him. Stalin and Trotsky differed in two particular ways, which meant that after Lenin's death, when they were vying for the control of the party, their belief system would influence who supported them. Stalin believed in socialism in one country. He said, look, we had the First World War from 1914 to 1918, 1917 for Russia actually. Then we had the Civil War between 1917 and 1921. He said the country is in pieces. Our transport infrastructure, our industry, our agriculture are destroyed. Our people are exhausted. We need now that we've won the revolution, we need to just work together to build a workers' paradise. We shouldn't be trying to, get involved in wars to spread communism to different countries, which was the idea of Karl Marx. Trotsky, on the other hand, believed in the idea of permanent revolution. Permanent revolution meaning that the war is never over until all countries are communist and there's equality everywhere. Now, if you were somebody living in the Soviet Union in the early 1920s and you'd just been through the guts of 10 years of, horrific suffering and warfare, what are you going to support? More war? Or the dude who says, look, let's forget about war. Let's work on building this place, making this a perfect place for workers where there's equality. So when it came down to it, when the struggle for to succeed Lenin between Stalin and Trotsky, Stalin won. He was the winner. And he initially did a deal with two of those old Bolsheviks I mentioned earlier on. These two fellas here, Zinoviev and Kamenev, who were influential leaders. He initially did a deal with them to share power in order to sideline Trotsky. They both thought, well, I'll get rid of Stalin. We'll get rid of Stalin, we'll be grand. They failed to do that. And of course, Stalin became the de facto, which means in reality, dictator of the Soviet Union from the late 1920s on. The Soviet Union was a police state. The secret police took on a number of different titles over the years of the Soviet Union, but the one that we will say is the NKVD. So if you're thinking in Nazi Germany, the Gestapo, in the Soviet Union, the NKVD, they're the guys who come knocking at your door in the middle of the night, pull you out, bring you to, the local police station, or if you're in Moscow, to the Lubyanka, this horrific prison where people were tortured, and you were scared of your life in the NKVD. In the 1930s, up until the first purge, the boss of the NKVD was Yagoda, and Yagoda had a network of informers all around the Soviet Union working to build a sense of fear in the population that if you say anything against the party, if you say anything against Stalin, if you're not seen to be an enthusiastic supporter of the revolution, well then the NKVD will come and take you away. And that created this culture of communal paranoia. Communal means shared by everybody. Paranoia is fear that you're being watched. And this culture of communal paranoia helped Stalin, helped Yagoda, helped the NKVD, helped the communists secure their control over Russia. One of the other ways that the Soviets or the communists managed to not just gain control, but keep control in Russia was through education. So as soon as the Soviets took over control of the state, what children were taught in schools changed. And we saw that already again in the video on where I compared Nazi Germany to the Soviet Union. And the curriculum changed. So the history taught to them was changed to suit the Soviet point of view. So, economics that was taught to older students would be only communist economics. Young people were encouraged to join the Komsomol, and the Komsomol was like a scouts organization. But it was essentially an organization set up to indoctrinate or to teach young people, to agree with the party line. Whatever the Communist Party said is the way things have to be. This was an organization that was set up in order to make sure that young people were compliant and did what they were told. So not only did you have the fear factor of the NKVD, the absence of democracy in the one-party state, you also had young people, these youth organizations like the Komsomol, making sure that there was no challenge from young people or independent thought to the party. And of course you had propaganda. Okay? Propaganda, the communists famously controlled all film that citizens of the Soviet Union went to see, all newspapers. Ironically, the main communist newspaper was called Pravda, which means truth, and there was nothing truthful about it. It was a paper which only gave the Communist Party line. Radio, and then it was things like Stakhanovism. Now again, this is getting into a little bit Leavenserty, but it was this guy called Stakhanov. He was a miner, and he did this incredible job, working really, really hard, digging out coal, and then he was used as like a propaganda symbol of, if we all work together, if we all work, as hard as Stakhanov, then we can all, make this country a better place. So we have to suffer together in order to prosper together. So that message was pumped out to people who essentially their day-to-day life was very difficult. Throughout the Soviet Union, especially in the early decades, the 20s and 30s, there was a lot of poverty, a lot of hunger, a lot of deprivation. But the message that was pumped out was that we are all in this together. We are all in this with Comrade Stalin. We're working hard. We must suffer in the short term in order to make life more tolerable and in order to make life better in the future. We know that, again, now this is getting a bit into leaving cert. So if you're a junior cycle student, you might just kind of, don't stress about knowing all this. You just need to know about the purges. In 1934, in a city that used to be called St. Petersburg, but had been renamed Leningrad in tribute to the communist leader, dead communist leader, the local communist leader, his name was Kirov, Sergei Kirov, was assassinated. Now, we don't actually know who killed him. The theory is that Stalin had him killed because he was getting very popular, but we don't have any proof. But regardless of that, Stalin used the assassination of Kirov as an excuse to, or as a trigger for the first purge. Now, the word purges is a key word for you to know about the Soviet Union. To purge means to cleanse through suffering. Now, to wash the dirt away. Now, Stalin said that the Soviet Union was corrupted by anti-revolutionaries. People who were supporters of his enemy, who he had gotten rid of, Trotsky. People who were working to destroy the revolution. And he had perfectly innocent people arrested, so that it created this sense amongst others that A, nobody is safe, and B, maybe this is why the system isn't working. Maybe this is why we're hungry. Maybe this is why the communist plans are not working. Maybe they're not working not because they're not good plans, but because there are agents who are working against us, trying to sabotage our work. So 13 senior communists were arrested, accused of conspiracy. Among them, the guys who had supported Stalin at the beginning, Kamenev and Zinoviev, and were put on trial in these show trials. They were filmed, and they were forced to confess, and either shot as a result of their confessions or sent to the Gulag. Now, Gulag is a good word to know for if you're doing the junior cycle history or leaving cert. So the Gulag was the Soviet kind of prison system equivalent to the German concentration camp system. Okay, so that's what the Gulag was. 1936, we had the first show trial. That's of the 16. They were accused of sabotage, done all that. Wyszynski was the chief prosecutor. 1937, I'm going to go through this really quickly because it's not really junior cert stuff. 1937, you had the trial of the 17. Yagoda was one of those. He was the two important people there were Pyatikov, Kolnikov, and Karl Radek. This is leaving cert now. Don't forget, Pyatikov was in charge of the 5-year plan, and it didn't work, so he was blamed. Yezhov had taken over as head of the NKVD. The third trial, March 1938, Rykov, and I mentioned Yagoda, who had been the head of the secret police, and now he was arrested, and he was accused of being a conspirator, and he was accused of being an enemy. It was all madness, but what it created was this unbelievable power for Stalin. So he was unquestioned in power, and everybody, even the most powerful people in the Communist Party, were terrified that the knock on the door could come for him at any stage. In 1937-38, Stalin also had, and this time he did it in secret, not in public, he had a purge, which again, remember what I said that means? And you arrest and you get rid of people at the top level of the Soviet army. And that was a big problem for the Soviet army, when people like Marshal Tukhachevsky, who is regarded by military historians as the person responsible for the kind of blitzkrieg tactics that the Germans used so successfully in the first years of the Second World War, and the kind of mobile warfare that we still today associate with military techniques. Tukhachevsky was a brilliant general. He was not a traitor, but he was very, very, very influential in the military, so Stalin got rid of him. He had him arrested, had him accused of being a spy for the fascist powers or for the imperialist powers, and bye-bye Tukhachevsky. And that was a big problem because the Soviet Union got soon dragged into a war, despite the fact, that's wrong, it says in August 1938, of course it's August 1939. In August 1939, the Soviets signed a deal with the Nazis, this Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact, or the Ribbentrop-Molotov pact, that they wouldn't go to war with each other for 10 years. By 1941, Hitler had invaded the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa, and because many of those kind of leading military figures, the senior officer corps of the Soviet army, the Red Army, had been purged, arrested or shot, The Soviet army was lacked in experienced leadership, and that resulted in the massive losses that we saw in 1941 and 1942 in the Soviet Union. But look, the big battles that the Soviet Union was involved in the Second World War, Stalingrad, Kursk, and Leningrad, they won all of them. Okay, despite the fact that they were, suffered horrendous losses. The Red Army, the Soviet army, proved to be, the most effective army in the world in the Second World War. In the Second World War in the Soviet Union, it was known as the Great Patriotic War, and they won. They pushed the Germans out of the Soviet Union. They pushed into Eastern Europe. They pushed into Germany, and of course we know that's why in 1945, when the Second World War was over and the Cold War began, the Eastern European states became communists because they were under the control of Stalin and his Soviet army. Final thing then, really, really quickly, want to go as quickly as we can. You won't be asked on this on Junior Cycle, so you can stop watching now. But if you're doing the Leaving Cert, don't forget to have a paragraph ready on the Soviet economy. Don't forget to know what war communism was. Don't forget to know about the NEP, the New Economic Plan, that came after war communism and caused that fight between Stalin and Bukharin, which was so fatal for Bukharin. Then you have your 5-year plans. That the first one, Stalin said he was going to drag the Soviet Union kicking and screaming into the 20th century. You had collectivization, which meant taking away ownership of farms from small or from farmers themselves and collecting all the farms into a giant, a cooperative farm. The idea being you were making farming more efficient, and had the exact opposite effect. Third plan was all about preparing for the war, and we know that the collectivization was a terrible, terrible, terrible event, and it resulted in the deaths of millions in famines that were brought about by, particularly in the Ukraine in the early 1930s. But essentially, instead of making farming more efficient, it made it less efficient. So just to finish off, if you're doing the Junior Cycle, know who he was, know what that word means. Know your background. Tsar Nicholas II, very unpopular because of his involvement in the First World War. The Soviets have their revolution that resulted in a civil war. Know the names of a couple of these guys. Understand the key elements of communism. Anti-democratic, there will be one leader. Totalitarianism, the equal sharing of wealth, very important. And then the use of secret police, youth organizations and propaganda to control the people. I think that'll do.